Board of Education for Friday, April 8th. Live stream is up.
Yep.
All right. One thing on the agenda this morning, is just the discussion of the reductions in the Board of Ed's operating budget coming down from the Board of Finance. I know some of us were disappointed with the outcome from Tuesday night with the Board of Finance. I looked back through my notes. I could not find what I thought were good reasons for the cut. I heard fear of large numbers and a general distrust continuing of the Board of Education's work. They said they struggled with the increase. One person thought that the assumptions in the budget were conservative, meaning padded. One person suggested that there was a process to go to town for more if needed, but that disregards the fact that we can't budget to run out of money in April. We have to cut now. We can only go to town if what we are budgeted for is not enough due to an unforeseen circumstance. So that was a false argument. There was a discussion about a 1.16 mill rate increase if we got our whole budget versus a 0.8 with this cut. But at least at that meeting, I didn't hear any discussion as to why the town could afford 0.8, but not 1.16. That must have been at a different Board of Finance meeting, since that is their job through the town's charter. There was a suggestion that education costs in general should increase in lockstep with general services from a town. I don't know exactly why one would think that the two would increase at the same rates, but nonetheless, that's where we are. And then there was one comment to that. The last time the Board of Education budget was accepted in full by the Board of Finance was not only 9 years ago, but it was because the Board of Education only asked for 1.97% that year. And this was a much higher ask. So that's my take in a nutshell from Tuesday night. And at this point, we can hear from Dr. De Silva as to where she and the administration think that they can find $560,000 of cuts without hurting the students too much.
Good morning. Good morning, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. Feels like we were just with each other, which I feel like with this board, we've been with each other a lot, as has the cabinet. And I just want to really take a moment to thank each and every one of them, because our days start very early. As do, I'm sure, all of you in your other lives outside of being a volunteer, and our days end very late. And we do that because we care deeply about the children of Ridgefield. We've actually had a lot of conversations about that in recent days. I think, at least for myself, and I think I speak for my colleagues, especially those that don't have children here and don't live in the community, is that we do really have to, every single day, we think about the kids here as if they were our own. So yours, and those that don't go to school, that aren't on this board, but go to school here or live in this community, we think about them as our own. And so I think when I hear words like advocacy group, well, I don't know that that's really what we are, but we really kind of, yes, that's not necessarily our official role, but as educators, I think that's ultimately what we are, is we work hard and advocate strongly and deeply, mostly for students, and of course, also with their families alongside of them, and with the learning organization of which we are. That said, the Board of Education adopted one budget and the Board of Finance adopted another. I hope I have these numbers correctly. As you know, our school business official is an interim, so I'm hoping that I have these right, but I believe that the Board of Finance adopted a budget of $106,600,490. Okay, and that means a reduction to our budget of $558,832. So I also was reminded across many of these meetings that there was a lot of obvious costs, right? Inflation, things that we've been hearing about, that impacts us too, right? And in a lot of those we can't predict. There was talks about, the surplus that we might have at the end of the year. And, we have a big budget. And we have to stay within that budget. And there's a lot of ebb and flow that happens throughout the year. You've all heard that. We've discussed it at the Board of Education level. And I would encourage the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen, please come and listen to our Board of Education meetings in person live. And if you can't do that, then I'd ask you to listen to the audio, because I know, or the video, because people are working really, really hard to explain and be thorough and as transparent as possible, so that when we get to this time of the year, at minimum, everybody has the same common understanding and the scope of what's happening in our schools. So we too are impacted by inflation. We too are impacted by supply shortages, that therefore they add extra costs. And within a school year, we have to navigate that, because if we're feeling the costs, so for example, I think a 20% increase on a daily rate that I received yesterday for a student, what are we going to shift later, so that when the end of the year comes, we're not asking for a special appropriation that the town and or the community hasn't been prepared for, but also we're using the money in the best interest of kids as best as we can. And sometimes that does leave a surplus. And so I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as I talk about the reductions that we're making to this budget, because I think it's also important that we think ahead and how we're able to use, if we do have any surplus, given the ebb and flow of a school budget. Not that we anticipate it, but there is ebb and flow. And we have to do that really within, even a percent, which I think is pretty amazing, given the scope of a school year and what happens within that school year. I also want to just take a moment to, good morning, Selena, to just really value the employees that serve our students. And we do this by telling them, and I know our parents tell them, and as colleagues, we tell them, but we also do this by giving them the resources that they need to be successful. Just this Monday evening, actually, Sean, I think you had asked me about the wellness of our faculty and staff, right? And making sure that they feel good about being a part of. And Liz, I think Liz Fogel, we had a goal around, it was something that mattered to you. Like, let's make Ridgefield a place of choice. And when there are jobs every which way that people aren't necessarily picking up, and education is one of those fields that is, we're not seeing teachers want to jump into the positions. We're not seeing administrators want to jump into the positions. And quite frankly, there's 24 superintendent openings now. I don't think people are jumping at that job either. And that's because the work is hard, but they don't always have the resources that they need. And so it's really important that we tend to the resources, their wellness. And you have to find joy in coming to work every day, right? And you do find joy in coming to work every day if you feel valued. And so for all of those that are listening out there from the Ridgefield Public Schools, know how we know how hard you work and how much we value everything you do. It has not been an easy week. I can tell you for sure. That's outside of budget. Has nothing to do with budget. It has lots to do with budget, but not necessarily direct through line. It has not been an easy week for our staff. We have been stretched incredibly thin. And that means everyone. There isn't, I think, Sean, I can't remember the word you used, Liz Hanaway will remember it, I'm sure, Karen, but the word you used in terms of the scope of our work on Monday night and how everyone just has to do everything, right? And that's something Ridgefield's proud of, I think, in many ways, is that, we touch every part of the school system. And I think there's a great value in that, whether that's Wes or Corey or me or Karen, we're a part of everything. But I can see how stretched folks are when they're dipping into work that isn't necessarily in their lane. So we need to hire those exceptional folks for sure, which I believe that we do. And I think the Board of Education in large part is a part of that through the process that we have. But we also have an obligation and a responsibility to retain them. And we do that, again, by making sure that they feel valued by words, by resources, and certainly by the joy that they feel when they walk up whichever steps they walk up each and every day. So as we jump into why you're here this morning, I want to be really, really clear that everything that we requested, we need. That said, we are fortunate this year that we do have some grant money to utilize in some ways that was intended for a different purpose. And in fact, when I say that, I'm actually reminded that the State Department of Education recognized Ridgefield and the way in which we wrote our grants to really be focused on kids. And I'm proud that we've been able to focus on kids by providing tutoring. We talked about that Monday, right? That's beyond the school day. We're not supplanting, we're not giving you in lieu of, but we're giving you in addition to. We've been able to provide extended day for kids, like I said, morning and afternoons, K-12. In addition to that, we've been able to provide a comprehensive bridge program that my colleagues, again, were able to communicate to all of you on Monday evening. We plan on continuing to do that, but there is going to be a slight difference. And that's when I speak tonight, I am going to do everything that I can through, and I know my team is alongside me to be sure that we can do as much as we can to hold on to those monies in the interest of kids. But I'm not sure that we can do it in the way in which it was intended. Grant money and the money that we received, ESSER 1, 2, and 3, specifically 2 and 3, were used or were intended to, they called it learning loss, right? To address learning loss. But for us, what we really hope to do with that money, and we explained this at the Board of Selectmen, I believe, and the Board of Finance for sure, was to mitigate future impact, right? So we know that we're seeing kids struggle. I would say as much emotionally as academically, but we're seeing them struggle. And so the goal for that funding is really to mitigate as much as possible, connected to budget, right? When you can intervene early, you could support kids early, when you can give, when you can fill in gaps, again, by providing beyond the school day, then you have the ability to mitigate costs that that may come your way. That said, even though you're going to find today, I'm going to show you today how I'm using that money slightly differently. I think you also need to hear that the model's not sustainable, right? We all know that when grant money comes in, it doesn't typically come to Ridgefield. Right. And that's, by the way, this isn't just grant money on the ESSER side, but we also have Title I, Title II, small pieces. Title I is specific to certain schools that actually meet the threshold around free and reduced lunch. And then we have a very small allocation in Title II, but being as creative as possible. But again, those monies are really are intended to be in addition to. So what we're in the position to do this year with the reduction that we received is, again, to look at other funding sources. Our team, and again, also just important to remember is that we have Board of Selectmen meetings, right? We have a couple of those and a couple of Board of Finance meetings where we address our budget, but really our process starts in October, which is probably why we're so exhausted by the time the Board of Finance meetings come. I actually said to the Board of Finance chair, I said, I don't know how you all do it. You had 3 meetings, we had 3 meetings. Now, naturally, we're starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, but we walk out with like a twitch in our eye and a limp in our leg, and somehow they look like they can go another 12 hours. But the process for us starts in October, right? It's line by line by line. Not just big numbers. So when you say, why is that increase $220,000 in math at the high school? We've done that work. We did that work before we even came to the Board of Education. We've done that work truly one line at a time to look for savings. And so I think, by the time you get to this point where you're being told that you have to make a reduction, it's hard to do because we felt like we've done all that heavy lifting and we've been as fiscally responsible as we can. And there's a lot of wants and perhaps even a few needs that aren't even in this budget. But that's what we're obligated to do, and that's what we'll do. So the team came together. We looked at all the new additions that we had. I think it would be completely irresponsible to make a cut in the new addition, for example, of the SRBI specialist at the middle school, the 2 middle schools. It's a half-timer already on each school. Just this past week, we've had 4 middle school between Friday, actually 5 if I count yesterday, between Friday of last week and yesterday, 5 middle school events that required additional support from whomever. And we tackle every resource we have. We've had an elementary need on Friday. I think it would be irresponsible for us to, at this point, make that reduction. Similarly, we thought about the SRVI math coach, the math coach, the district-wide one. And while that might seem like a low-hanging fruit, when we looked at that position, we didn't look at it just as a coach. We looked at it as the flexibility to have that individual shift into an intervention position if needed. And really that's where what our coaches have done, our building-based coaches over the past couple of years, and will probably continue to do based on the number of students that require intervention. So while we have an interventionist in each of our schools and a coach, that coach oftentimes is supporting students that require academic support. So it felt as if to make that reduction, it wouldn't be serving the population that we're saying really needs our help. And that said, we don't know what future years are going to look like when we look very closely at our numbers. And we talked about the data system that we intend on using to track that in a more systematic way. And so removing those two positions from the budget felt very irresponsible on our part. And for as much as we appreciate the extended day options within our grant funding and the bridge, we know that we can capture the kids during the school day. The extended day, less, right? We don't know which kids will sign up. Sometimes the kids that really need it don't. And by having those supports built in to their school day, we felt needed to be a priority over the extension of the school day. I just also want to take a moment that, just to remind us all that we're coming off of a global pandemic. And while we don't necessarily, and I know that Dr. Hanaway and Dr. Shoa has spoken at length. I don't know, it feels incredibly repetitive, but at length about special education and the needs there. But the reality is we're going to see kids for many years to come have the impact that it's had on kids for many years to come. And what that looks like, I don't know. And we've talked a lot about kids coming back and being able to bounce back, and the theme that we started off this year with the rebound, but we also know that some kids can't. And so again, while I'm sharing these reductions with you, none of them were easy. So I'm gonna ask John Mansfield, if you don't mind. Thank you. Let me just change this a little bit for myself. Okay, so the first reduction is the network specialist. You probably remember that we felt very strongly about this position. Currently, we have one network specialist per 3 schools. So again, just thinking about how much people are doing and how thin they could be spread. But we did make that reduction. So the impact of that is the service, right, to students, faculty, and families. Longer lead times to address issues such as device replacement, the classroom technology, deployment and repairs, parental services. So on a Friday, which happens often, and I'm a part of those emails, when the parent can't log into the portal to find their child's grades at the elementary level because it's the first time or they're having issues. Some of those supports that we offer them, student data, the login items, all of those that come with having network specialists that are available. The special education technology services, getting a service or a tool out to a kid may take a little bit longer with this reduction. Again, we put it in the budget because we already knew that we were spread incredibly thin. But when looking at the budget as a whole, we felt that this was the one area that would perhaps have the least impact directly on students directly. Like I said, indirectly, yes. And it, for those of you that know, and even when it's just 9 or 10 people in a room, when you have one network specialist and everybody needs to log on at the same time, whether it's for testing or something else, how long that can actually take, or how needy people are. Their technology skill is on a continuum. And by the way, I think I'm pretty technologically savvy, but there's many times that I have to call somebody up here because I can't figure something out and it impacts my ability to do my job. It's the same with kids. So there's a $90,000 deduction with the network specialist. We removed $100,000 from the technology repair line. And let me explain that a little bit. So the impact there in reducing that line, the delay of known repair projects, right? Whether it's security or network, again, longer lead times in addressing critical repairs that have to happen. In certain instances, it may impact instruction, right? So if my technology board isn't ready, and it can't be repaired, I may need to go use the library media specialist technology board. So certainly it could impact them, especially if it's a longer period of time. And it may mean that we have to pull funding from other lines for unexpected repaired costs that just have to get done. And we'll have to balance that throughout the school year. A little bit of a gamble, but we're going to reduce the transportation line by $35,000. And the reason we put this back in is you've heard me speak that our costs for transportation are increasing each and every day. And so thinking about some of those high cost runs and perhaps looking at it again and seeing if there's another possibility to shift different students and different runs around to save some additional funds there. We have $35,000 in facilities, furniture primarily. So you've heard me communicate about that, is that you go into some of our conference rooms or some of our classrooms and the furniture, and it'll be across schools. Obviously, the furniture is either a hodgepodge or, not conducive necessarily even to kids' learning differences, right? The different seating arrangements or group seating, group collaboration opportunities. So that's the impact there. That's about a $35,000 impact. We have $24,000 in the budget for course recovery. It's in our stipends line, and this will now be at a cost to parents, which was done in the past. We were able to actually take it out through Bridge, but we budgeted for it unknown to whether or not we would be able to pay for it through Bridge. So that's where that is. This is hard, and I'm sure it's hard for all of us because we've talked about pay to participate at nauseum. And I know that Dane has really worked hard to try to reduce the impact for families. But as you can see, the $35,000 is back in. So it basically leaves between the weight room fees and the pay to participate, it basically leaves it at zero. So if we had eliminated all the presentations we shared with you from September to now, that's where we're left. So it's just back to where it was. And then you're going to see a $233,832 reduction in the budget. And so there's a couple of different things here. We're looking at the combination of our ESSER funds and our title grants and seeing where possibly they could be amended, or whether or not they fit into the goals now that have been outlined. So we have a little under $70,000 in digital tools. We have the data warehouse, which is a $44,000 startup cost, which is, we spoke to that on Monday evening and the importance of having that as part of Power School. And then $32,000 out of the textbook line. And so what we'll look to do is amend some of our grants if it's needed. And what will happen for some of the programs like extended day tutoring and Bridge, we still believe that we'll be able to offer them, but it will be an abbreviated version. And so it won't be to the level that, we would have planned for or have hoped for. John Mansfield, you could just leave that up for a second and then you could stop sharing. But the goal would be wherever we can find savings, if we can find savings over the course of the year, or even in the remaining couple of months of this year, we would look to be able to not use those funds. So for example, right now I have $90,000 in the ESSER 3 grant, which actually was just approved yesterday. Talk about irony, for the in-school or the in-district transportation pilot. If we were able to find any surplus this year, I would transfer that and ask for the board to support that so that that $90,000 could be then used to extend provide more opportunities for extending the kids' day, is in particular into next school year, which is what we've done now. And so that's where I would ask for the board's support in any way. If we find savings when it comes to those transfers, you'll know that ultimately the goal is to try to keep that money how it was designed, how it was allocated, in the interest of direct services to our neediest kids during that extended day program, and obviously the bridge to try to provide a comprehensive approach. So hopefully, I'll take any questions. Hopefully I can get your support on that. There are definitely challenges ahead, and you'll hear a little bit more about how we've worked towards solving them in upcoming board meetings. So for example, playgrounds and making them accessible to kids, and some other things that we are going to need to sort through. But I think that, again, I thank the team for being creative, really looking at not impacting students. We were not trying to rile up parents in this process by increasing class size or taking away extracurriculars. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember we won't have the ability to be creative like this in the future. And so in these reductions, they do impact kids. They definitely impact kids in a different kind of way than increasing class size in a traditional school day. But I would hope that the board would support when we look at any opportunity to find savings and make transfers so that we can get this money back into what it was intended to be. I'll take any questions.
Tina?
So I just want to thank every one of you, the entire team. And this is just a comment, it's not a question. I've been watching these Board of Finance meetings and the cuts for years. I think my kid was in 3rd grade and now he's a sophomore. And I only share that because it just gives the scope of me as a parent and a PTA leader, a parent who's involved, watching these meetings. And it's always unfortunate when these cuts happen because they affect our kids directly. I trust our administration they're doing the best. There's transparency in budget. We've talked about it constantly. And I mean, no disrespect to the Board of Finance. I know they have a different role. They have to look at their ambassadors of the town money. But this is me as a parent and a parent who was involved. It's always disappointing because when we talk about taking away from kids, it's unfortunate. And I really appreciate every single thing, all the shares you've done. It was an impossible task. You did not put general ed versus special ed. I mean, that's always a problem too. And this is just my comment because I was at the Board of Finance meeting. The number always comes up about enrollment and how we're declining. And this is something that has been repeated. And I echo Susie's point. I wish the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance would watch our meetings because education has changed. It is just not about a child sitting behind a desk or X amount of child in a class or students in a school. Everything has changed. How we educate kids, their needs have changed. The pandemic has brought it even more forward. If possible, it's highlighted even more concerns. So the way we educated kids is not linked to enrollment. It is not dollars to dollars. It is not X amount of money. We'll have some kind of outcome. So I think as a parent, as somebody who's been involved and now part of this process, it's just so disappointing. And I just want to thank the team for every single thing they've done. I share your concerns. I appreciate that the list that you've shared because it keeps away. And I hope that we can get together to a place next year. The Board of Finance understands that every time we come forward, where there is no extra money, there is no fluff. Every dollar that you cut goes away from kids. And that's just the comment. I mean, I can go on for 15 minutes, but I want to respect everyone's time. So I just feel really, and it's been, Susie knows, I think many of you know, it's been a very emotional 2 weeks for me. So I'm sorry if I'm a little emotional on this, but I just wanted to say this because really 6 years, 7 years, I've been part of this and there's always a cut. And the last point, every time there's a cut, it doesn't solve the problem. I think it sometimes make it worse. And then next year when we add to it, then there's more money and people are like, why are our budgets going up? Because we're not addressing the problems or we're not able to address the problems head on. So I think that's another point that I would like to say. I'm sure, Susie, you can say it more eloquently, but I was just trying to share what I feel. And yes, it's a little emotional. So sorry about that too.
Thank you, Tina.
Liz? And then Selena.
Thanks. So I want to say something that's a little bit different, but goes to the topic. I think, and it's an ask for this board for future conversation. We need to start standing up to the state on unfunded mandates. Part of the problem here is that the sustainability of the town funding every single penny that comes out of the 18 plus different pieces of legislation each year, with additional task forces, adding additional burdens, taking additional money out of what little we actually get back from the state, is appalling. When I started to think about this, as both a taxpayer and a parent in the school district right now, and comparing it to other places that we've resided and been students at, the way that this has been modeled in Connecticut is unsustainable for towns. And whether that's deliberate or not, as a town board, we need to start thinking about our advocacy beyond this room. Because no matter what we do on the town level, our taxpayers, who the Board of Finance primarily deal with, are the ones that get hit. They get hit constantly and frequently. And if you look at the body of legislation, even just this year, none of our state representatives are actually pushing against what is going to directly impact the students of Ridgefield. They're putting additional criteria on top of funding. They're looking at funding models that will take the paltry 500K or whatever it is we get for ECS to begin with back out, and relying on one-time pandemic fees to cover the burden for a few years, maybe, if we're lucky. And unless this board starts to become an advocate at that level, this is going to be the conversation every single year, because it's unsustainable for older people to continue to live in Ridgefield because the tax burden is so high, and it's not just because of the town. And so our students are the ones who continue to take the hit. Our teachers are the ones who continue to take the hit, and we're trying to change deck chairs on a sinking ship that is sinking only because of Ridgefield. And so my ask is not at the town level. Dr. De Silva, I know you and your team have done everything you can to be conservative in the budget and explain and create business cases for what you've asked for, and I respect that. The problem isn't here. We cannot continue to have these unfunded things pushed down and expect to maintain a decent budget for this town without killing every single taxpayer in it. So with that, I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Liz. Selena?
Yeah, that's actually a good statement, Liz. Definitely something to think about. So I just have a question, Susie. You all did a great job, and I hate to see that we had to cut anything. How are we going to help the families who can't pay for the course recovery? I'm a little concerned about that, just because I do think there's been some learning loss, and I think some people will just decide to opt out of that because they don't have the funds. So how can we help them? Is there a creative way we can help them? And of course, the pay to play, I know we have stipends for families, but is there a way that we can do it so maybe it's more anonymous, so people feel more comfortable asking for that if they need it?
I'll answer both, and just want to comment on Liz's point. And 100%, there has to be a shift at the state level, in particular around excess cost. It is not manageable. And listen, the reality is we have a great school system. There's no doubt, right? We have a great school system. And I think if I have a child with a learning difference, and I know that there's a community that's going to offer an exceptional program, both through general ed and through special ed, why wouldn't I be a part of that community? Of course I would, right? And I'd want to stay here, which is all good news. But the reality is to provide programming, again, general ed and special ed, it's expensive. And without support from the state and an expectation that communities like this one can continue to sustain it is unreasonable. Because what Tina, you said, and we avoided doing, we did not take two communities and divide them here. And we won't take two communities and divide them here. publicly, but ultimately there's going to be an impact on both, right? Class size will have to be a thing at some point that impacts both communities. And because special education children are general education children too. And so when you increase class size, when you take away extracurriculars because there's nothing else to take, because you have to be able to keep your teachers and you don't want your teachers leaving, you have to manage what their day looks like, what their responsibilities are. At some point, this is no longer reasonable. And advocacy across domains, not just from this board, but from all boards, from community members, has to happen. And the louder you are, the better. Selena, to answer your question on course recovery and pay to participate, if there's any parent who requires financial support, that's really with anything. That could be textbooks, technology. Technology is not a good example, but textbooks, field trips, anything like that. The process is confidential. In fact, even with our students who meet the threshold of free and reduced lunch, very few people in the school community actually are allowed to even have that information by law. So the process is confidential. I'm sure that families may not necessarily know that, but they can absolutely reach out. And if we discover that, or we know for whatever the reason that there may be a family that's not engaging for financial reasons, we reach out. Again, we wouldn't want a student not to engage because of financial impact. Doesn't mean that every child will engage, even if we offer, but we do reach out.
Sean?
100% agreement with Liz. Just want to impart a fun fact I learned last week, and it made the hair on my head stand up, which little hair I have. We send $130 million in income taxes to the state of Connecticut. We get back, and this includes the schools, the roads, everything, $1.5 million. So if we got rid of all the unfunded mandates, we would probably be in a better place than we are now. That's pretty stark. We get 0% of our school budget paid for by the state. Bridgeport gets 80+% of their school budget paid for by the state. I could do wonderful things if somebody would just pay 80% of my mortgage. I would have lots of money to spend elsewhere. So that's where we're at.
Thanks, Sean. Any other comments for today? We'll take this and vote at our next meeting. Amy?
Just wanted to say, this is my first year on the Board of Ed, and I have been so impressed, Susie, with you and the entire team throughout the budget process, and watching you and the entire team at the Board of Selectmen meetings, all the Board of Finance meetings. It's so impressive, and I am so proud that my children go to school here in Ridgefield. I'm just wondering, as someone who's new and not quite sure about the process and everything, just wondering, now that you've determined what you think our cuts should be, once we approve, or if we don't approve, but once we do all get to agreement, is that something that gets sent to the Board of Finance so they can see what the reductions actually translate to for our children in the school system?
They're free to watch this meeting or ask any questions if they're curious, but the number has already been set by the Board of Finance as to what goes to referendum. What makes up that number, they no longer have a say. Selena.
Could we maybe send a copy of it to them just so they could actually see what happens when they do cut it? Because I'm not sure everybody watches the meetings, but I think that might be beneficial for next year's talks. I think it's when you actually see, okay, now we have children who might not be able to, recover from some learning loss. When you actually see the cuts on paper, it's a little more stark. I'm just asking, is that something that we could do?
I
could send it.
I can speak to that. Yeah. And so one of the things that we've actually, we've been talking a lot about is, how, every opportunity is an opportunity to reflect, is can we communicate more? How can we engage so that there isn't just bits and pieces out into the air, but really, when you listen to a meeting like Monday night and Dr. Hanaway's presentation and the questions that were coming from the board, because many of you have children in the community, so what's happening, you have a sense. I think it's important that they also, I recognize their purpose is different than our purpose, and we're a Board of Education and they're Board of Finance or a Board of Selectmen. But I do think it's important for them to understand the community as a whole. And so one of the things that we'll be doing, Selena, to your question is, we were actually not necessarily beginning today, but beginning with our more traditional board meetings, but maybe today's a good one, is to send all boards our agendas, our presentations, and the video. Because if they're not able to come, we understand, then there's another opportunity for them to listen to the Board of Education meetings, because I do think that the team here does a very good job of being really transparent and comprehensive about what's actually happening in the schools. And so I think it's important that they hear that, not just connected to the budget and that purpose, but they understand contextually how things evolve over the course of a year.
Any other questions for today? If not, does anybody have a motion to adjourn? Sean? Do we have a second? Rachel, thank you. Thank you, Dr. De Silva, for everything today.
Thank
All those
you.
in favor of adjourning?